My name is Trisha Morton Thomas and I'm a filmmaker. My mob are the Yale. It's about 250 kilometres northwest of Central Australia, which is a town right in the middle of Australia. I go home as much as I can. Usually, not in the last 5 years or so because I've been flat out writing a TV series, but normally I'm at home maybe 4 times a year.
Yeah.
I think it's extremely important to go out to country. As an Indigenous person anyway, you need to be able to put your feet back on the ground. And in my language we have a word called murra. And murra pretty much says it's where your ancestors' spirits come from. So for my ancestors, from my mother's line, my land, my murra is a place called Arangi, which is the morning star. And so it's really important for me to go home and put my feet on that ground. And because my relationship with my land is a family relationship, and my land is my grandfather. And so I go home to my grandfather so that I can, if I'm hurting or even if I'm happy, just to go home and feel your grandfather embracing you. And it's a really empowering feeling. Well, I never actually got the opportunity to meet my biological grandfather. He died before I was born. But luckily with my people, that all of his brothers are also my grandfather. And so I was nurtured a lot by these old men, my grandfather's brothers and my grandfather's first cousins, who not only taught me the value of myself as a human being on this planet, but also my value as a woman and what I could give to my society and my culture. And it's a real sense of self that you get from your grandfather, from your grandmother as well. But it's a special bond, I think, with your grandfather. Of course. You can't have a full woman without having a male influence there, and a positive male influence, and a nurturing male influence. Otherwise, you're only half a person, You have to have, what is it, that yin and the yang. Yeah. And it's important. It's important that you have the male influence to ground yourself as a female.
Yeah. And you've got children?
Yes, I have 4 children.
You've got 4 children? Boys, girls?
I've got 2 boys and 2 girls. My oldest son lives in Sydney. He's born from another mother, but he was born in here with me, and I've raised him since he was about 3 years old, and so he is very much my son. And there's no difference between him and the child that was born in my heart to the child that was born in my stomach. There is no difference at all. I love all of them. And then I have two girls who are just, one's just turned 18 and the other one's almost there. In November, she'll be 18. And then I have a 12-year-old son, and he's a gorgeous little man, a little bit of a ratbag, but still, he's very lovely, and I have very respectful children, from what I'm told. Probably came from a little bit of bullying from me. But no, look, I raised my children. I was often told when they were little that I spoilt them too much, or I let them get away with way too much. But I'm of the opinion that I'm not raising children, I'm raising little people. And as little people, they need to be able to decide for themselves what's right and wrong. I can guide them through it, but ultimately they have to be able to make their own decisions. And children can't make their own decisions if they've constantly got somebody standing over them saying, no, you will do this and you will do that, because it doesn't allow them to think for themselves. No, there's not a lot of difference, not really. The thing is love. It's love and empowering them. And unfortunately, my children's father had schizophrenia, so and he's passed now. He was a very decent man, except for the illness. But I understand that. People would say to me, how can you still be friends with him when you went through so much hell? And I go, well, I wasn't. It wasn't him. This is an illness that took control of him. Once he was diagnosed and medicated, he became the man that I fell in love with again. You know, he was a very gentle, kind and considerate man, and that's who he came back to. But while he was ill, we separated, and then I'd had to raise my children on my own, which I've pretty much done since they were about 3 or 4 years old. And so you have to be a bit of a disciplinarian as well, but you have to discipline with love. You know, you can't discipline with anger and stuff, which I've been guilty of at times, but on the whole, you have to sit your child down and say, look, what you did was very, very wrong, and I love you very much, but you cannot behave like that. And a lot of people say, you spare the rod and you spoil the child. I think on a lot of occasions you actually spoil the child by administering the rod, because then the child starts thinking, well, if it's okay for an adult to hit me, then it's okay for me to hit somebody else. And so there's not a lot of difference. There really isn't a lot of difference. You're raising a person. You're not raising a male or female. You're raising a person. I think taking over of the reins has been forced on Indigenous women here, and or they've had to just pick it up and run with it, because so many of our men have been disempowered. I mean, before we talk of a patriarchal system, well, in Central Australia, yes, there was a patriarchal system here, but that was more along following dreaming lines and following culture. It wasn't so much as the men had complete power over the women, because in my culture anyway, the Mudjara people, men cannot go through law and become men without a woman dancing for them. And so, so they can't become men without women. And so, because once the British came and invaded our country and sort of, they disempowered our men. And they still continue to do so today. Our men are, you can have an Aboriginal child walking across, or Aboriginal man walking across the road jaywalking, and suddenly they're 10 years in jail for jaywalking. I have a nephew who had an argument with a police officer, and he spat on the ground in front of the police officer. And then now he's done 2 years for assaulting a police officer. And so, when you're looking at stuff, our men are they're under attack in a huge way. And they come home and, so they drink, or they take drugs to be able to sort of, to sort of hold their soul together, I guess. And a lot of times it's destroying them. But then they come home, and who's the most vulnerable person at home? Your wife and your children. And I think, it's like most families and most people, you will generally snap and get angry at the people you love. And that happens to anybody, regardless of, what background you're from. Because you know that person is going to forgive you. And that they see who you really are, rather than the influence of something. And so I think that's what has, and I'm not condoning domestic violence, but there is a deeper issue than this man is a mongrel, because generally they're not. It's just a lot of hurt piled up there. And so we need to find a way to empower our men again, because if we don't empower our men, all of our families are going to be lost. There is an equality. I mean, when our country was invaded, and there are a lot of misconceptions of Aboriginal culture. And when I talk about Aboriginal culture, I'm talking about the one that I know, which is the Mudjara culture, which is, it is very separate to other Aboriginal tribes around the country. We all have our own cultures. But I guess, when the British came in, they not only took our land, they took our history. When you have a look at the journals of the first white settlers who came to Australia, they talk of coming across villages of 3,000 people, sedentary. They're sitting on their land, and they talk of these fields where people were harvesting. And then there's drawings of brick houses or rock houses that are in Australia. And so for 200 years, because Australia was settled on the basis of terra nullius, you then have an entire people who can't say yes, who can't come out and say we came across these, villages of 3,000 people, because how can you have a village of 3,000 people and still have a country that's terra nullius? And so they have had to, in every single way, hide any kind of advancement that Aboriginal people have in Australia. And it's only because of the journals of the first white settlers that we're starting to learn that our history is not what has been taught in school. And so then you also have not only an attack on our history, but then an attack on our culture, which then turns around and says Aboriginal men are violent, that Aboriginal men don't value their women. And so you have to rethink now and go back and go, hang on, this is what has become since white settlement. Before then, and my mother really didn't have contact with white people until she was about 12, 13 years old, because her father just went, well, my grandfather was involved in the Coniston, his people had been slaughtered pretty much in the Coniston massacre, and my grandfather had survived that, and that was 1928. And so he then came out of that massacre with this opinion that all white men were just evil, and he was not going to get his children anywhere near them. So although he worked on a cattle station here, he kept his children right away from it. And so my mother talks of a time when the women had as much say as the men. And oftentimes, some of these women were so high up in knowledge that they could override anything that a man said. And that we have women streaming and we have men streaming. And I think that's just a normal thing. Like today you have she sheds and you have he sheds, And it's normal for men and women, and I think it's also healthy for men and women to have time apart, and for males to have time with males, and for women to have time with women. And to say that, Aboriginal women were ruled over by men is completely wrong. And the society has to start thinking of Aboriginal men in a completely different way, because most of the violence that's come has been a direct result of British invasion. Yeah, tonight is the night that the TV series that I've worked on for 4 years, I've pretty much sweated blood over and almost lost my mind at times, I think, is finally going on television. Although I don't think for me tonight is not the big deal. It was a couple of days ago we had a screening for the community here at the town, on our town council lawn, and that was the night for me. That was the one where I was walking around like complete jitters and felt like vomiting every moment, and so it was more for me. I needed I needed to know the reaction of my community to this series more than I need to know the reaction of Australia to it, because it is about my community.
What was that reaction like on Sunday?
Well, it is a comedy, and thank God people laughed. So I would have been like, oh God, I can't do this anymore if no one was laughing. So yeah, we got a lot of good out and out belly laughs, which is for a series that actually does it pokes fun at everyone. I'm poking fun at black fellas, I'm poking fun at white fellas, I'm poking fun at the Africans, and it's more to say, look how ridiculous things are. That we have gotten to this point where black is fighting against white, and white is, you got this white character in there, it's like, bloody abos, coons, been here for 60,000 years and you've done nothing with the place. And look, some people have had a go at me about including that kind of a character and those kind of words in the series, but I can't write about Alice Springs if I don't include that character, because that is probably the most important character in there. Because if a white Australia can't look in the mirror and see how utterly racist they are at times, And I don't think it's, I don't, you know, I have a, it's weird because I don't like to think that people are inherently horrible. I think that people are born very loving, you know, and they're not born with this ability to look at somebody and disregard them because of the colour of their skin. They're born with an ability to love. And it's only through society and teaching that people become, you know, they become hard and resistant to other people. And so with 8MMM, it is a comedy sort of saying this is beyond ridiculous now, and it's 220 years later, and it's time for all of us to wake up and start working together, and we have to. I have a culture that is the oldest living culture in the world. And when you have a look at the things that we have achieved in this country, which, you know, white people will still deny us, and to this very day they're still denying us. You know, you've got a Prime Minister who says that living out on homeland is a lifestyle choice. And it's like, this is not a lifestyle choice. We're sitting with our family, and family belongs together. Which, you know, if you're looking at Australian government, they don't think a family belongs together, because now there are more Aboriginal children being removed from our families than there ever was in the time of stolen generation. And I just read in the paper last night that, you know, in the Northern Territory, 147 children have been sexually molested in care. You know, so they're removing them from parents who, you know what, may not have the most glamorous house, you know, but they have a home. They have a home that they're very well loved. They might not have, you know, the best clothes on, but they have the best clothes that their parents can afford. And then you take them out of a loving home, and then you place them with, and I have to say this, and I'm not being racist in saying this is a complete fact. Majority of Aboriginal children are placed in the care of non-Aboriginal people. And the department has got so bad that if a family member puts their hand up for a child, I think it's almost a policy now that they do not place a child with a family member. And so they're removing them from their homes, placing them in an alien environment and an alien culture to them. And also, they're at a high risk of being sexually molested, which is already shown to be the case. And then you have the minister saying, I sympathise. It's like, sympathise? Are you kidding? The sympathising is not good enough. We need action, and we need our children to be removed from predators. And that to turn around and bring an entire intervention into a state based on the fact that, or not fact, based on the assumption that Aboriginal children are being abused in community, and then, you know, and then removing all of those children and placing them into homes where they are actually being abused. It's ridiculous, and I don't know what the thinking is, because, you know, the Northern Territory intervention is when the government came into this state based on the Little Children Are Sacred report, which is, they went into Mutijulu community, and they, with this idea that there were pedophile rings in that community. And so based on that, they brought in this entire intervention, which took away people's, you know, they removed one of our human rights, which is the racial vilification. They suspended the Racial Vilification Act in order to be able to do some of the most racist things possible to Aboriginal people. We have here what is called the Basics card, where if you're on a Centrelink payment, you get part of your payment as cash, and the other part is this card, which restricts your freedom, restricts your ability to be able to move from one place to another. It restricts, you know, just as a human being, having somebody telling you, you can't spend on this and you can't spend on that, telling you how you can spend your money. And then oftentimes it creates a lot of havoc, because this card, you can really only shop at Kmart, Coles and Woolies. So who are the winners here? It's the big corporate companies. The little companies like, you know, the bush community shops and the little corner shops here in Alice Springs, you can't, they lose. And they lost in a big way when the basic card was first introduced. What I would like to share is, if anybody comes in and they take your children, or they're trying to remove you off your land, fight tooth and nail, because you've got nothing to lose. What do you have? The only thing you have to lose is your life, but what is your life worth without the people you love and the things you love? You just become a little hollow husk, and at least at the end of your days, you can say, you know what, I didn't just lay down in a little ball and give up. I fought, and we have got an Indigenous peoples. You know what, we have ancestors, and I know people go, this ancestor thing. But we do have the spirit of our ancestors, and it does run through us, and we are a mighty people. Just because we didn't invent the wheel, and in reality it was somebody who, it probably was a tribesman who built the wheel. So that's a fact. The thing is, white culture very much, it judges us on white culture. And you can't, if somebody said to me, why aren't you proud of your white side? You've got an Aboriginal side and you've got a white side, so why aren't you proud of that? And I go, what? Proud of a culture that systematically goes into other countries and commits genocide. Proud of a culture that locks up Aboriginal people at an alarming rate. And also, not just that shows no justice for a human right or human life. You've got Aboriginal men who are dying in custody the massacres are still happening here. They're just not happening with guns out in the open. They're happening behind closed doors when no one can get help, and our men are being strung up or they're being beaten to death in jail. And so I'm going to be proud of that culture. I'm going to be proud of a culture that comes in and rapes every piece of land they possibly can. That is more, people expect me to be proud of a culture that finds money and material possessions much more valuable than a human life and a spirit. I can't be proud of that. And so the only thing I can be proud of is my Indigenous heritage. Because despite what is happening in Australia, these statistics that, Aboriginal people are this, and Aboriginal people make up the most of people, of the jail populations, and Aboriginal people, Aboriginal men are the most violent. When you're hearing all of that, which is a load of BS, but that happens across every single culture. I am much prouder of a race of people that learned how to live with the land and learned how to communicate with that land and live in peace with it and each other. We're constantly being called nomads. Look, the thing is, I don't see Aboriginal people, yes, we walked around our home like anybody else does. You walk around your house. That doesn't make you a nomad. It just means you're walking around your house and yard. Our people never left our traditional lands. We didn't go into someone else's land and say, this is mine, or wander over to the coast at that time. If we were heading into the coast or anything, that was for ceremonial business. If we went into someone else's land, it was only for ceremony. So then we have this race of people who come in calling us nomads. And these are people who travel everywhere, taking over everything. They're the nomads. We're not. We're sedentary, and we've stayed on our continent for over, we're the longest. We've had the longest continuing association with our land than any other race in the world. So don't call me a nomad, because I'm not.